Welcome, everybody, to a special episode this week. We have the CTO of a really cool AR hardware company, Realware. I have here Timon Binder, who has been really interesting. We had an amazing chat at our meetup this week. Had dinner at Google, and wanted to continue the conversation with our broader audience. And I have Mark here on the line too. So Timon is the CTO of Realware, and they focus on the enterprise segment, building headsets for AR applications in multiple enterprise use cases. And he has really interesting plans for expanding to the consumer segment. With that, Timon, I'll let you introduce yourself to our listeners and give them a brief background about what made you start this company and your brief journey.
Yeah, thanks so much for introducing me.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure. I mean, I also would have never thought I would be here now, meeting you just a few days ago. It's been amazing. It's a pleasure. So thank you so much.
And for context, you're here all the way from Switzerland, just here for a couple days.
Yeah.
Shopping for a new location.
Exactly. As mentioned, so our headquarters of the company is in all the way up in Vancouver State, Washington. And so more and more being here, having all the connection, it's more and more apparent we need to come here. So that's why, as you mentioned, we're looking for an office over here right now. So maybe just very quickly to me, thanks so much for the great introduction. As said, I'm a board member and CTO at Realware. For everyone who knows me already or who doesn't, I was previously the co-founder and CTO at Almer, together with Sebastian Dietschen, who was our CEO and is currently our CEO at Realware. So we started our company in 2021, quite a lot of years back. It still went very fast, built up the company with a very similar vision to what Realware currently does, with the focus of really trying to solve a end customer problem all the way through. So not only doing the hardware, but really focusing on the whole solution that actually makes something work. So we didn't want to create just a hardware product that people use. They run some simple, funny apps on it, and then they toss it away, but actually controlling the whole process from the start to the finish line and actually make it useful. And that's why we dabbled more and more into the also software aspect. But then it got to such a point that we were apparently so excited that we got purchased or acquired by Realware, which was just by the end of last year. And then a few months later, got the chance to take over the control of the company and now drive our vision that we have from the beginning in this new form factor, and have now access to the US market also much more since they are headquartered here, whereas Almer was previously headquartered in Switzerland. That's also where I still live, but more and more I have a strong feeling I'm going to be here way, way more in the future. So yeah, thank you again for having me.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, this is an awesome place. There's tons of startups, tons of innovation. And I think hopefully you had some good conversations at our meetup. There's
Definitely
amazing, talented, accomplished, intelligent people attending our events every single week. And it's a hotbed of innovation, not to mention funding, and a lot of customers too, hopefully. So on that note, can you tell us a little bit more about who your customers are? And from my conversation, my recollection, it seems like right now you're focused on the enterprise use case.
Yes.
And that seems like where most of the AR companies, apart from you, are also focused on.
Yes.
In contrast to some of the consumer segments like Meta and the Apple Vision Pro, which is focused on more consumer, either gaming or entertainment.
So I think it's best to explain that a little bit when we go into the use cases. So what are the main use cases that currently drive the B2B segment? What we have identified, and we see that from our customer bases, is we can segment them into two very big ones. Most of them are focused around manufacturing, purely in general. The very first one is everything remote support. So if you have any kind of a machine, any kind of industrial equipment, or in general, any equipment that is rather complex, they'll be more complex than your average printer, and you can't solve on your own, you need to get help. And quite often that's by someone who is not around, not in the area, and so need to have a remote call with someone who's not at location. I mean, the remote worker takes a headset, starts ideally as quickly and as easy as possible a remote call with Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet. We would have loved to do that. Currently doesn't work properly. To really get that, might be some recommendation for that. To really get effortlessly a problem solved without having two people in one location. And so specifically during COVID, we saw a huge spike on that use case where people really realized, oh, we are toast if we can't go there and fix it. Specifically, if you can't even go into a country. So a machine doesn't work in China, it's very quickly very expensive. And that also means in automotive industries, for example, if you have a line that just rolls through, if you have an issue, you need to solve it ASAP. And you might not have the expert at hand, so you might need to do a call. And quite a lot, you need to have video, you need to have your hands free and really solve the issue. So that's one very big use case focused around anything resolving issues alone/together. The secondary one, which we see more and more growing now also is logistics. Very good example there is Coca-Cola, for example. So they use our headsets in logistical warehouse picking. So there we work very closely together with ISV's company that build these software applications end to end that actually solve a picking problem. Now, what does that mean? Picking means in big warehouses, I think, Mark, that might be interesting for you as well. I think Amazon, they have that as well, even though they have a lot of robotics built into that. If you have larger items, there's a lot of get this item, bringing over here, stacking onto this order, and sort of getting everything together. You walk around a lot, you have forklifts, you drive on them, and so on. But you have a lot of use cases where you need to go pick something, put it somewhere else, get the next thing, and you do the whole day, nothing else than that. And so there they wear our devices in full shift, usually 8 hours, even in multi-shifts most of the time, where they go there, they pair the devices with scanners, which are Bluetooth scanners from Zebra or ProGlove, for example. Scan items, it automatically displays where they need to go, how many they need to pick. They also confirm orders through voice, and it reduces their error rate by a double-digit percentage and also increases their efficiency to the extent that you can think about a worker, if you take an average salary, getting so many percentage more efficient, it gets very quickly very lucrative for the companies to develop put the system out that can do such a thing. And so that we see in everything logistic. It's not only in beverages, but everything that has large scale logistics that start to use more and more of that. And it's very sticky because it's ERP integration. It's very complex to get that going. And we can only do that thanks to our great partners like TeamViewer, for example. They built great software applications that solve these issues. And so that is the secondary, very big one. Maybe coming back to the automotive one, the companies we have there is Ford, for example, is a very big one. A lot of other automotive companies that work in these sectors, a large scale manufacturer. I sadly can't mention everything, but everything that produces big machines to solve issues of ABB, everything, CNC machines, these big expensive machines that are very complex to entertain and resolve issues with. And then there's a third gap. I try to keep it very short. It's sort of the medical sector we see coming more and more. The more compact the devices get, the more we can tap into that market. And there it is more sort of a get an additional doctor to watch over your shoulder and record sessions for purposes of figuring out who is at fault if something happens, but also just get assistant or get a lot of college people to watch into a ongoing surgery that is maybe not so often happening. So if these are the main focus we currently see on the B2B side.
Yeah, that's really cool. I didn't even think about the medical use case. I'm sure you run into a ton of like compliance and privacy issues there. But coming back to some of the industrial and enterprise use cases. So in our field, we're constantly talking about the existential risk when AI is going to take our jobs. So it seems like your product might also eventually get replaced by AI. Amazon definitely has robots that are doing some kind of logistics work. And with the growth of robotics and the rapid advancements in like the operating system level, the training data where they have simulated environments, creating a bunch of use cases, examples to train these robots to operate in the real world. It seems like it's only a matter of time when you actually don't need people roaming around, and maybe it might be worth it to jump on the bandwagon rather than fight against this current. So on that note, I was kind of brainstorming with you the idea of potentially using some of these devices that you have in the field, collect the data, the visual data from all of these people working with these very specialized niche use cases in logistics or in automotive industries or even medicine, for example. use that as training data to build models that can eventually reach human level accuracy or surpass that even.
Definitely.
So any plans to do that either yourself or partnering with other companies?
It's an amazing question, actually, because specifically in R&D, there's a lot going on in that direction. And so why is that the case, right? I think, as you mentioned, the way we wear the devices, or people wear augmented reality devices, they are first person view, perfect camera footage. If you start actually trying to capture data on how people resolve issue, like a lot of these robots, they need a lot of training data to actually get things done. But in the same time, these cameras also, if fed into AI models, very well start to understand context. Now, still now, we'll know the prices and everything might not be ideal to feed continuous streams into that. But the way Moore's law goes, and we all know in what direction that goes, it's probably only a question of time. And so we have a lot of sensors placed directly like that to take advantage of that. Currently, they are not captured. Also, due to privacy, it's in B2B a little bit more difficult, these kind of things. But more and more we have, if customer opt into wanting to do something like that, that we can start to do a lot with these data. Right? It's first person view. We see exactly what you're doing. And that allows for a lot of more efficient and sort of new ways of interacting with the world. So for example, a very good example is logistics. There's still a lot of interactions of the humans with, okay, I picked 4, I confirm, yes, and so on. But we actually have everything to confirm what exactly is going on. If you look from a visual feed, okay, I see he actually did pick the 4-pack of let's say whatever to drink. So I can automatically confirm it. And then in the next step, I know if he places it wrong, all without these confirmation steps. And so we are researching very heavily into that to take advantage of that. And for that, we place sensors into different directions to really capture everything that is going on from a contextual point of view, to really understand what are we trying to solve, what are we doing, what is the intent, and what are we supposed to be doing. And then I guess that leads very much into, yeah, what is the future going to hold? If everything is going to be robot only, which I believe it's a very long term probably going to happen, um, it still has a lot of niche points where we need to sort of get advantage of taking advantage of these technology and sort of become, I don't want to say better humans, but sort of merge. And I think Sebastian, my friend, he has a better view on that, to really merge with the technology to get better at what we are great at. And there's always going to be place for these kind of things. So I'm not too much afraid of that, but I still see that the challenges ahead might be that it might be a little bit more difficult to find a job to just do picking in the amount of people that are currently doing that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, the stuff is really interesting, and I love the fact that you are solving these problems in a way that I think a lot of other people don't really think about. Because I think a lot of people are focused on solving things only within the computer, but you're actually out there working in the real world, trying to solve real actual use cases. So one thing I was curious about with all of these sensors and talking about AI models, are you finding that you're able to run a lot of these AI models directly on the hardware, or do you need to hit some sort of cloud server in order to do the processing? So, for example, I saw that you use, I think, Qualcomm chips in a lot of your headsets. Like, do you find that you're able to run those on the edge and do like the proper local inference, or do you need to like actually hit some sort of cloud somewhere in order to figure out if you are uh, for whatever data you're trying to process.
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. And we thought a lot about that because it's a very strong, like, sort of question on how you actually want to deploy and how you want to build the devices. But the issue is still running now is the technology is advancing very rapidly. Nevertheless, let's say the chipset aren't really there yet to run everything locally yet. Also, there's two sort of approaches to this. The very, very compact form factors, they start to offload a lot onto phones. It's the easiest way. You have it in your pocket. Um, use it for connectivity as well. Still run into the issue that sort of Apple limits to some extent how you can actually pair these devices. Still is a little bit of a mess. Um, but if you have that, then you can offload some of your compute to your phone. What we chose, and we come a little bit more from the B2B side, is we have quite a good sort of a little bit more volume available. So we can do a little bit more on device. So that's why we don't actually require a phone. Now, when you ask specific about all these AI models, they're, at least currently, the way it is, it still runs in the cloud. So it means you have still certain features available if you're offline, because you still need to navigate through voice. Imagine you don't have an internet connection, you don't just want to be stuck. Okay, but that means you're to very much simpler ways of detecting voice, and usually that means you default to sort of speech commands that are I want to say hard coded, but they're sort of set in stone. For example, if I want to go back to the home screen, I need to say navigate home. If I want to open the settings, it's going okay, open settings, and so on. That is very much not intuitive and not effortless. It's very bad. It works, but specifically if you have people and you want to scale it to mass, let's say markets in the end, you can't have that. And so as soon as we hit an internet connection, we can have the advantage of everything running very capable. Now, with that said, in the last few months only, the models get better and better and more efficient, and we can start running the first one on device. But they're not yet deployed. I think that's very important. But it's definitely only a question about time until it does, right? And I think on the iPhone side, you can see it as well, on all the Google phones as well. We see pretty much that it gets easier and easier, and you can do more and more while not having a connection. What is very important to mention, Mark, nevertheless, is quite a lot of the use cases that they actually have in the end is that they have most of the time an active connection ongoing. So it still might be, or still is, more favorable to still do more and more in the cloud. Use proper protocols to actually share audio directly with the cloud and get everything back. And also latency-wise, we got to a point that it's very, very nice on what we see now. But yes, we can definitely start doing more and more, and we have the chip set ready to the extent that we can do so. Yes.
Yeah, that's super interesting that you're able to run it both, locally and then on the cloud. And I assume that once you're running on the cloud, you're able to get a lot more functionality. So one other thing that I was kind of curious is um, why you decide to go kind of the voice assistant route as opposed to using some other types of input modality. Is this something that customers are asking to say, hey, we want to use hands-free only? Because I know that using other voice assistants, like a lot of people, they don't actually want to uh, talk out loud, right? Because so, for example, at least not maybe not in the B2B space, but in the B2C space, um, you might not want to say like Alexa, like what's the weather like when you're on a bus or something, right?
Yeah,
But if you maybe I don't know, because I saw you were working with like Harley Davidson and some of these companies, like is this something that the companies were asking for to say like, hey, we really want a way to interact via voice, even if voice maybe has a higher error rate? Because I know that like if you have voice, maybe there could be background noise, people may mishear you. Like it's just going to make mistakes, right? So
yeah,
I'm just curious as to like why you decided to go the voice route as opposed to maybe having some sort of physical device that you could kind of type into or some other input modality.
I think that's a very good question, right? Because when we talk to Meta, also a lot of others, there's different approaches to this on the user interaction. So the whole UX UI side, I guess there's a lot of different approaches to this. And I guess it's not 100% clear yet what will win the race. From hand tracking to, as you said, voice, but also these different bands that you can use to pinch and controllers. And I guess the whole space hasn't really converged on this is the right thing, at least not the way I see it. But how did we get to thinking at least that voice is a good way? So maybe we need to start on what we think is the end goal. The very much end goal we believe is going to be brain interface. Now, we're obviously not there yet. But a lot of the devices we have, they're very close to sort of the area where you would start to do something like that. And we did invest some time into looking at that, but it's obviously not yet the time for that. So once you have brain interface, then there you go. You can just think about it, it will happen. So we see long-term sort of the star is that. Okay, so in between, what do we need to solve something intuitive and effortless? We still have at least figured out, and that's maybe more on a personal approach, is people are very good at explaining what they want to do. And specifically now, thanks to AI, it got vastly better than it ever was before to actually explain a task and then have it done. So for example, me personally, I'm already too lazy to type stuff into OpenAI or anything else. I just sit down, specifically if I do business plan or if I do anything else more, let's say I plan a new project, I just sit down, talk for an hour, and they'd be like, just, okay, write it down. And it works pretty good, I think, already where it goes now. And so from that part, we have a strong belief that if properly explained, you can solve almost everything. And with the import part, the hardest point, and that's a very reasonable question, is, okay, how do you solve stuff like, let's say I need to search for your name, Mark, right? Your second name is maybe a little bit more difficult to pronounce, or let's say an AI might not properly write it. How do I do a call to you? Say if I say, oh, I want to call Mark, I might have 10 people in my contacts that are called Mark. But we figured out if we map it properly and we use stuff like fuzzy search, which, if you know, sort of have a lot of error rates built in and can still reconfirm with the user, we can end up calling the right people. And so if it goes very bad, you can do alphanumeric, like Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot. I'm not sure if you know that. Sort of feel like a fighter jet pilot if you do that. To actually really dictate something. It's not ideal, but it works very well. And so the whole problem is, if you argue on not using your phone, then you wouldn't want to have an additional device that you need to charge and be sure that you have it with you. You just want to have one. And already one is too much, right? Which is also why we don't need the phone. So we connect directly to Wi-Fi. You can leave your home phone away. And specifically for B2B, that is important. They don't always have phones. They want to really make it on device, everything only. For setup, it's maybe fine to use a phone, but then you don't want to touch it anymore. So we needed to find this way to really make it only like that. And then try to keep it very brief, but another way is obviously hand tracking. There, the whole compute side and power efficiency is just not yet there. And on the Microsoft HoloLens, Sebastian and just learned a lot that a lot just doesn't work. And so often, like, you're just fiddling around and it's just not easy enough. So which is why we end up choosing completely to go voice only. And specifically now, thanks to the revolution going on, I think we were quite lucky, because I think it could have not gone any better to hit such a time where it actually gets so much better. Because let's say 4 or 5 years ago, it was definitely not as capable as it is today.
Yeah, I guess on that note, both Mark and I used to work on voice assistant features, Mark at Amazon, me at Google. And we've seen how this older generation of voice assistants, these smart voice assistants, as they were called pre-LLM, were just massively overshadowed by the ability of these LLMs to truly understand what you're saying. But then on the other hand, they lacked all these integrations and tools and APIs and all the features that these old assistants were built with. So having worked on Google Assistant on these smart displays and smart speakers for a while, it seems like people resort to just a couple different use cases pre-LLMs. They're like timers, alarms. Just I want to wake up. I want to know when this task is done. Calendar, productivity tools, help me write a list of notes, help me do a to-do list. And then it was this open-ended question of search and question answering and just interacting with this device as an intelligent assistant. And it seems like we are really on the cusp of unlocking this use case with voice assistants, just asking it any kind of general question, having it either pull from its own internal knowledge from the neural network, or call a bunch of tools, go out there, do a bunch of research, act as an agent on your behalf, and then carry out that task. So it seems like you have a couple ideas brewing about exploring this new frontier, or this old and new frontier combined, and potentially entering the consumer space. Do you want us to tell us a little bit about that?
Definitely. So, right, when we had the first sort of LMs, we had a closer look, we're like, oh, okay, that's crazy. Like, the things that it can start doing, I think a lot of people didn't really realize. And we very quickly thought, okay, what we are doing is almost posed compared to what we can do now, basically, using the technology. And so where beforehand it was not at all intuitive because they needed to use predefined words and so on, now it could just talk freely. A very simple example that I think I mentioned you as well is, imagine you want to activate the flashlight, and somehow I need to figure out how I go there. So either I navigate into settings, which I also don't know the word for, then I'm in settings, need to scroll through multiple pages, find the setting, and like, okay, it's called light source, and sometimes it's called flashlight, and sometimes it's called lights and whatever. And then I toggle it on, fine, it's all. I go back to my application. And if you do voice only for that, it's just a hassle. Whereas now, the way it works, and that's what we have now running on our operating system, is I can just talk very freely. I don't even need to mention flashlight. I can just say, hey, it's very dark. I need help. And then the way it works so intuitively is like, oh, I have these functions available. Where can I map it to easiest? Oh, great, it's that total flashlight. And when we first saw it, and that didn't even take long. That was like 2 days. I mean, you don't need to be a coding expert to get that done, right? Like, whoa, that is impressive. Like, okay, let's put more functions. Like, how many can we do? Now, obviously, there's in the beginning, context window is only so long, but if you just think a little bit further, it's only a question about time until it's longer and longer. And I think just OpenAI just announced now what 1 million. So like it gets very quickly very obvious that you can start to do most of the things very well, and it starts to behave very good. They're still small bucks, but it really starts to be able to do really what I want. And so we see on the capabilities, it's not only controlling the hardware, which we can do very well since we control the device itself, but really sort of integrate with a variety of other services that beforehand took immense amount of time to get right, and then really interact with it. Obviously, still limited to some extent to the APIs that are available, what it can do. But we also believe that in the end, if you think it even further, that we can send the agent out doing tasks and coming back, I guess more into the direction of what the operator does, or the ones who know what we're talking about, sort of browser views. It's a new ETH company that started to do a similar thing where you can actually analyze and let multiple browsers actually start doing stuff for you and just come back with the results. Where the challenge is much more for us then, how do we actually represent information properly on a limited display? Whereas in the back, there might be a lot of other things going on. And so we try to take all these complex tasks and map them on simplified UI elements that actually go out, like make things really intuitive and effortless. And we see that we can do that very well now with a very limited amount of engineers. I think whereas back in the days, that would have been impossible to do.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So you mentioned agents in your headsets. So in my mind, headsets would be more for like real time type feedback, whereas agents might take 30 minutes to think about a particular task.
Yeah.
Is there a particular use case that you found that agents are useful with using like an actual heads up type display?
It's a very good question. So we're not 100% sure yet what it will be. And I think specifically on that aspect when it comes to the agents. All the ones I just mentioned with really how to operate the device, call people automatically, make notes, take pictures and send them through Microsoft Teams, send emails and so on. They are very obvious to us and we get a lot of pull from the customer bases, right? A lot of them, they want to integrate with these features, send emails, send pictures that they take on the device where beforehand they were just stuck on the device. Send them out, interact, and really start to take proper note of what the device can do. Now, when we go more into the B2C segment, we see more and more where we think, hey, these agents will going to be more and more powerful to be used as well. And I guess that's not really limited to AR devices only, because as much as you know, you can start doing that also on anywhere where you have access, right? Let's say I want to have something to book me a flight, go from A to B, and I'm just on the run. Or for us, what we think about a lot in Switzerland is we have a lot of trains. So everyone needs to know when the next train is leaving, which one I need to take, where I need to go. So go out, get me the best route, and come back once you're ready. We don't have the proper pull yet because we're not in B2C. So we're very cautious to figuring out what the engineers think is a great idea to what actually is a good idea. Because that is exactly what we don't want to do. Just have a lot of guys in their basement thinking, oh my gosh, that's great, let's do that. I want to use that. And then 90% is like, are you nuts? No one uses that. And so it's very hard to say what agent exactly would be the ones used in the end. But I almost think they will be driven by what people use on a laptop and on a phone first, I think. And then the benefit is just going to be, I will be doing it on the run while I'm driving. While I'm driving is maybe a little bit the last thing you're going to do, but like while you're doing something else. So I think that would probably be the one I could see most coming. And so for me as a person, even though I don't think that might be what others think, it's going to be a lot of that. And the rest, and I think that's what we talked about before, is more a lot of tasks to just get emails properly done. I'm so lazy. I ideally don't want to write my emails anymore. And I think we might be the last area of generation that sort of learned to type still properly. Whereas it might be in the future more and more voice driven. You might even start coding voice driven. Now that's obviously way more in the future. but we just were at the hackathon in San Francisco, where a lot of these concepts start to become more and more realistic, I think. So it's probably only a question of time until when we start doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally sold on voice being the dominant form of input. I like this little extension where I can just hold the function key and it listens and keeps typing. Not sponsored, Whisper, Flow, but anyway, you can find a bunch of these other tools to allow you to just keep talking and then convert that to text, and then take that text and then do something useful. Coding is a popular use case because now vibe coding has really taken off.
Definitely. Yeah.
So being able to talk to cursor is way faster than figuring out how to type the exact phrasing that you want. You know, you don't need to think about formatting. You don't even need to have the right kind of syntax. Just throw verbal spaghetti at this LLM, and then it'll just understand what happens. But coming back to your point about building a consumer, I guess, voice assistants, there have been a lot of companies that have tried to do this. We talked about the Humane AI pin, in
Exactly.
which it got slammed by the media. MKBHD and
Yeah,
some people, I think like single-handedly destroyed that entire company. And I don't think it was his fault. I just don't think the product figured out a good use case for consumers. I have the Rabbit R1 laying face down.
I already told you need to show me. Yeah.
Just as like as a decoration piece or something, because it's really super orange. I was really fascinated by the promise that they made, because having like an agentic app store was incredible. And the fact that these things are kind of hard to it's hard to figure out use cases. But then if you have an app store with other average people building agents with voice without much technical ability, that would lead to like an explosion of useful features from customers for customers. But like figuring out the ecosystem and what will be the dominant player in the field, what kind of form factor that will be, whether it is AR glasses or phones. So it's like, how do you go about figuring out the product to build, especially coming from the enterprise segment? Is there something on the consumer side that you're focused on, or maybe
It's a very good question.
your own journey or your own set of
Definitely.
problems?
I would say, right, in all of us, we have B2C to some extent, right? Because we think about our own problem. And specifically from my side, I never really worked in a big company before. So we actually started our company right out of college. We didn't even finish our master's degree. Went back later out of force of instead of family and friends, but like, you need to finish that. So we finished it, both Sebastian and me, exactly the same. So we thought a lot about our own problem, how we could use it. Now that's a bit difficult in B2B because they have other problems. And it took a while for us to really understand their problems. And in the same realm, it was quite challenging, but nevertheless very satisfying to then start to understand what their problems are. And we were very close to customer for a very long period of time, to really try to understand what are their problems in a day-to-day business environment. How can we help them? And it's challenging to really get your own feelings out of the way. And you might think as an engineer, I really think this feature is what they need. But the end users really know much better what they actually need. And so by actually listening, we really try to wait for the pull and not push a feature into it. Nevertheless, there's obviously always certain thing, and I think Apple probably did that best ever, to really decide to some extent users don't really know what they want. We're just gonna force it upon them, and then they realize, oh my gosh, that's what I always wanted. And so to some extent, we need to do that a little bit, but really try to listen. And so the good thing is now on building new features is Realware has sold into the direction of 100,000 devices. They went quite a few years back, so they're not all really in use anymore. But specifically the newer generations, they are used quite regularly. Some of them are almost used daily. So we have a quite large customer group that actually have an existing value that they see in the product. And so they buy for that. And then when it comes to our company, we have a profitable part that is doing that. Now we can build on top of that and not just build on stories and nice to have, but really try to give them more of what they already love. And what we realized more and more is if we go more and more and listen, these problems become more and more a B2C problem and not only a B2B. So if we start, I want to call this expert, I have an issue. Very quickly after that, it's like, okay, I want to send him pictures of the issue and messages. And then like, oh, you want to send messages? Starts to get closer to B2C. Like, okay, I want to call this. Like, could I make a call through WhatsApp? Even though, as mentioned, that's not yet possible. It starts to drive more and more of these use cases where we start to realize, hey, once we start running this on more compact style of devices, it actually gets very useful more and more also for the B2C segment. Whereas it's not that we try to really push something and then see, let's try it out. But it's more that we develop it for B2B and more people are like, I started to do my emails on here. Whereas it might have not been intended for that, but then more and more devices join the party and actually get this use case more and more valuable. And so that's what we try to do. We really try to listen and get our own opinion out, even though I still think we need to nail this email thing. And that's really my personal view. Just because I could see myself, if I have a really long email, I'm like, okay, I need to read it. Okay, I can let it summarize, but then I type it down. Whereas if I have someone read it to me, I really do the reply properly, draft, I can refine the draft and just send it out. That's what I wish in Dream. And I really can see it's probably only a question about quarters and not years anymore. So
It's funny that you mentioned email because I feel like everyone has maybe like 2 or 3 core ideas that they keep trying to chase with every new wave of technology. When we have the dot-com boom, when we had like this new on-demand explosion, now when we have LLMs, people try to build tools for email, they build tools for events, and they build tools for networking. And I think Notion just came out with another email client, which is supercharged with AI and help you navigate it without as much tedium. There's like superhuman email. I think they also tried to use a lot more AI. I don't think they've ever come out with like a public product. It's always been in closed beta for like the last 5 years or something.
Right, and that's also very important. We haven't solved that. Like we can't already do emails, but the way I would see myself using it daily, we're not yet there. But I can see sort of one iteration after the other is like, oh, we're definitely getting there. It's really just a question on when, not if.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah.
I guess my takeaway from this meta-analysis is that I think people have a lot of problems that they're trying to solve, and they keep hoping that this next wave of technology will be the one to solve all their
All the
issues.
problems, yeah.
And I guess how do you like solve for the present versus solve for the future when a lot of possibilities will be unlocked? And do you have like a current 3 to 6 month plan and like 3 to 5 year plan that are working in parallel but separate?
Yeah, definitely. So what we do, and so we have a lot of strategic alignments that are not only on the management, we try to get everyone involved. And so, right, our company is still rather smallish, of around 50 people. It's not thousands. And so you can get that going much easier and really start to think of what does the majority of us actually think is a good idea. Not just me, not just our CEO, just what does everyone actually think is a good idea? And then if you think, oh, we can do that in this sort of time properly, then let's maybe do a little bit less, but let's do it properly. Because we are deploying on B2B solutions in general, it's very important that it actually runs. Because if a warehouse goes down, you don't want to be caught. It's not fun. So you need to take care that you do one small step after the other and actually solve something. And we sometimes have this issue that we feel the urgency a little bit too much. We're like, oh, we're too slow. Specifically, we still are sort of a startup. We want to be fast, agile. But it helped a lot by really making what we're doing properly and only add one more step if we actually think it's ready for the next step. And that means if we lay it out in phases, we have it currently in sort of 3 phases on the parts of what are the main capabilities that are really needed to get an intuitive and effortless usage of the device when it comes to hardware controls. So that's the first step. And that is basically complete now. It's rolled out on a lot of our customer, but large scale only rollout is going to be in a few weeks. No, that's the first step. Then the second step is, okay, what are these sort of intermediate tasks that now add a lot of value, but are maybe not yet replying to emails and solving all these issues, but really making a direct call with someone I want to have, really putting notes down, sending pictures to the right person properly and annotating them, adding short text and send them back and forth. And so that is going to be solved in probably 3 to 5 months after that. Also rather quickly, with the possibility to it taking maybe 2-3 months longer. Depends on how many developers we can get on in. And then from there, it's sort of where phase 3 starts, where I guess the fun goes. And it doesn't mean we can beforehand already do some of these tasks, because that usually works, but it wouldn't be enough that we would say the feature is ready. Where we really think sort of long style messaging back and forth with proper rewriting, that you actually have what you want, that you start to go into proper email replies and so on. And then in this phase, we also have sort of calendar scheduling, which also is part in phase 2, the way we have it now, but really get it more detailed. Okay, show me that, and having a variety of other use cases mapped on these base UI elements. And so for that, we built a lot of core elements that can map a lot of different information accessible through API. So for example, if I want to reply my Teams messages, that might be different on what is running in the background, but what is represented to the user, it is very much exactly the same. So I'm still representing UI elements. I just fill them with different content. And so it scales much more to then whatever integrations we have. And we had a quick talk about that, right? It's in the end only limited by what you can integrate with, but also in the end, what you actually have that actually solves something. Because if you have it just, it's integrated, you can do it, but it doesn't actually work, then it's not going to be used, I think. And so, and that is sort of the plan moving forward. And then even further ahead, which we also still start now because it's more on the hardware side, we have more and more of these contextual awareness sensors feeding back into the AI and starting to harden it. It goes very much into what Tesla does and others when they have their cars driving and someone sort of takes over the steering wheel. It's like, whoa, almost an accident. It's like, okay, let's annotate that and let's figure out what's going wrong and let's train it and make it better. Whereas we have that as well because we have the context, we have a lot of information about the human using it, so we can feed that back in and make it better. But that's, I guess, then very realistically seen, that's more next year than this year.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So one thing I was kind of curious about is when it comes to kind of knowing, kind of going on top of what Shashank was kind of asking to think about what was going to be in the future. But I kind of want to go back into the past a little bit and talk about your first customers and how did you kind of sell people on the idea that to say like, hey, we want AR headsets, right? Because AR headsets are kind of like I think they're kind of new technology, relatively modern, whatnot. And how did you say like, hey, we have this product, we have this AR headset, like this is something that you need and or like did they come to you to say like, hey, we have these problems, we want to solve like X, Y, and Z things. Like how did those conversations go initially to say like, hey, like we have this AR headset, or did people come to you say like, hey, like can you build us this, like this is like a type of use case that we're trying to solve. Like I think that is something that a lot of people who are starting new companies may find useful to know, like how you kind of reached out to the customers, like how you listen to them, like what types of steps did you do to figure out like actually the things that they wanted to solve.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So what we have, or how it went for us, is we started prototyping a lot, right? We didn't really have an idea yet. Specifically, if you start from zero, you have a lot of chicken and egg problems. So do we want to put the optical system to top, the bottom, want to come from the side? It's like you can compromise almost every aspect, and if it's almost an n-dimensional matrix with different things you can compromise on. But really try to find a sweet spot on what you want. And once we have that built, sort of ish, we had some articles locally in Switzerland that came out, sort of talked about the vision, which made a lot of companies very intrigued. And they're like, hey, I want to try that. And interesting enough, these were the companies which had the biggest pain point that we tried to solve at that point. And that was getting people together when you can't get them together. It was one big one. And then the second one
was during COVID.
I was actually slightly pre COVID, but it was still, for some company, it was a bigger issue already than otherwise. But yeah, it was, I guess you could all say it sort of around the same time. Where you then have someone who's not in location. So we had a company called Lupfe. It's also very open. They were our first customer, together with another customer. They had a lot of garn manufacturing in India going on. So they really couldn't be in location. It's very hassling environment. It's very industrial. It's humid. It's hot. phones overheat. And so our product was very well optimized for sort of hitting that sweet spot in, let's do a remote call with someone who's there, not in Switzerland, with someone who actually is in Switzerland. And so they actually reached out to us, and they helped us actually harden the product. We did a lot of cycles. We actually, the very first time we met them, we didn't really have something running. It was more like, look, you can sort of put it on the Raspberry Pi still somewhere else. And we had helmets in the beginning. We didn't know what form factor. It was just big, huge, clunky thing. And over time, and thanks to listening to them, we sort of got it to where it ended up being. And yeah, so that is how we got the first ones. And then it's still, and I guess that's also a good thing, but at the same time a bad thing. It has a very strong innovative approach, and sort of be this AR, great, I want to try this. So a lot of innovation department tend to be like outreaching, be like, oh great, I'm gonna use this for who knows how many use cases, which at that time and still now even are still not possible. But they need to have a story on how we're innovative. Yeah, we have this new innovative product. And more we tended to actually not sell to them because we realized they're just laying around. They don't actually have a use case. They just want to play around with it. And so even though we get a lot of coverage also news-wise and people actually are interested on the innovation side, they ended up never being the ones who actually ended up using it. Because they were dreaming and they helped us maybe putting a direction, but they never drove a use case to the end. So I think that's how it was in the beginning.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and I love to hear how things kind of grew, and I imagine that once people actually were giving you money to solve the use case, that's a pretty strong indicator to say, "Hey, this is actually a problem worth solving," not just, like, you brainstorming. Because I mean, like, you might talk to us, and we have, all kinds of ideas, but we're not actually handing you a paycheck, to say, "Hey, like, here's $100,000, go build this," right? But if somebody says like, "Hey, we have this particular problem. Here's money to solve the problem." That's a really strong indicator. They actually really truly care about that particular problem. So actually, one other thing I kind of wanted to get into, it's not like exactly an AI question, but um, you mentioned that in your initial kind of prototypes, you were using a Raspberry Pi, which is using Linux, Ubuntu, but right now you are using mostly Android, and then you are using your new OS, which is the Almer OS. And I guess we were talking before this, it'd be now rebranded to ReOS. But I'm curious as to why you decided to kind of go the Android route as opposed to going the Linux route.
Very good question. And right, I already mentioned it beforehand. That was a long discussion. And we had experts from all sides in the beginning. I mean, at least as many as we had access to, given that we were not here in this area. Might have been better to be here for that. To really think about, hey, what do you want to do? And obviously, starting on Raspberry Pi, we were coming from a different direction. That was really much fast prototyping because no one of us actually had any clue of AOSP. So it's just easy to just take Raspberry Pi. We had even just simple slideshows, and we didn't even have voice commands going. In the beginning, it was literally just slideshows. Someone had a Bluetooth keyboard sitting 2 meters away. If someone said, next step, just hit the button. We're like, I don't need to build voice commands to see if it's actually useful that way. We did tests like that in the beginning only. And they were aware, obviously, we didn't tell them we're faking it. They knew we were faking it, but just to see, hey, would it actually work? Would that make sense to really just use my voice, even though we didn't have it done? So we really believed in fast iterating, like as fast as only possible. No one is going to write any code to get anything in. Just get the Raspberry up somehow. We even had at one point, we had just phones in video calls with Android phones with USB-C to add other displays as secondary screens, put that in front, just really hardcore on that side. But then as you asked, right, at some point we need to decide what route we're going. And on the power optimization wise, everyone was like, okay, definitely not Android. So we thought, okay, it's a good point. But then we knew that a lot of apps on the whole ecosystem still is building on top of Android. So if we want to use and take these capabilities, we might as well just go that direction. And that was actually the main reason why we ended up deciding, let's go with Android and try to throw everything out that we're not needing. That's also what is currently the case. So it really goes from AOSP side and feel like, okay, we don't need this. Goodbye. We don't need this. Goodbye. Still is not as power efficient, clearly not as it could be. But it means out of the box, 90% of all applications basically run. Doesn't mean you can navigate them well because the UI is clearly not optimized. But I can put an app like Twitch, for example, on it. And just I can do a Twitch call because it runs in proper Android. It's a mess to go and change my Wi-Fi settings, for example, but it works. And so from there, the main challenge then was, okay, now how do we actually get the interaction going, given that it's not a touch optimized device? But in the end, coming back to your question, it was very valuable because we saw a lot of competitors like Realware now doing the same thing as us. And so therefore we could leverage their ecosystem as well to get them also to port over onto our devices without needing to modify anything. Now, there still was modification needed on the UI side. There's different aspect ratios and cameras are different and so on. But it's much quicker than if we would need to adapt everything to run on a non-Android device. That is the main reason on why we went that route. And also because the form factor itself always allowed to be a little bit less power efficient to what I guess the direction is if you really want to go to these type of classes that you are wearing, Mark, where it's very, very difficult. You cannot waste one single milliamp somewhere. And so it really needs to be super efficient.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I tend to agree. I think that Android does make a lot of sense, and it seems like a lot of companies are kind of going that way. So, for example, I know the Oculus Quest is
Yeah.
going the full Android route. A lot of companies are going all in on Android, and you can also leverage a lot of people's experience developing Android. Because I know there's like plenty of people who have lots of experience developing in Android working on these types of particular use cases. So I'm sure like the developer pool is potentially bigger than if you cooked up your own completely new OS on top of a boot or whatever, right, from the ground up. I mean, you might have a little bit more power control, but I mean, even on Android, you can have some power control as well. So, I mean, there's some really, really efficient devices that are running on pure Android. So, I mean, I think it makes sense, right? It makes a lot of sense. Um, so, kind of switching the topic a little bit as well, right? Um, I know that you're developing a lot of the hardware and, you are I think I don't know exactly where the headsets are being assembled, but, how have tariffs, kind of impacted everything? So, I know it's kind of a topical thing now with, all of the Trump administration putting everything in and, I is that affecting you? Is it, like, negative? I don't know how that's all
Yeah,
going.
sure. Um, so it's actually quite funny, right? So we are obviously not born here in the US, right? So we're from Switzerland. And I guess all of Europe looks a little bit different at the US with regards to that. Most might not really care. They're like, oh, they're having fun over here. Obviously, it touched us more, obviously. So we have manufacturing in China, and currently specifically assembly is over there. So we source a lot of active components not from China, right? Qualcomm, Snapdragon chipsets, and so on. They're obviously not coming from there, but they're from the region, at least. And so China has this advantage of really having all these components in one place, right? To build these compact products, you need a lot of know-how, but you also need all the suppliers in one region. You need to be fast. Like so Shenzhen and those Shanghai, these areas, they have everything in one location. It's like you have shopping malls. You can just go, I pick my camera, I pick my sensor here, okay, chipset, get it together, get it done, 2 weeks, prototype done. Whereas you just can't do that in these areas here. Now that means taking advantage of that and also of the cost implication, we have a lot of all devices manufactured there. Okay, now what does that mean in terms of tariffs? When it got announced, we didn't, let's say, immediately ship full planes over to the US to escape the tariffs like Apple did or some of the pharmaceutical companies as well did. Because we knew in the long run, specifically on the electrical side, that cannot be permanent. Like it's almost impossible. Like if you think about the iPhone, for example, where 90% of the iPhone are still produced in China, some part in India. If you have just say 50% tariff, Apple is running good margins, but still there's only so many margins, and that costs very fast, really deep. So we always maybe we were a little bit naive to think that cannot be too long. So we thought it's just a power play. Someone who is gonna hold this up long enough until actually having a resolution. And so right before where they announced that it got exempt, that Microsoft is exempt, at least for now, we already started thinking, okay, maybe we need to start thinking around the strategy on what we can do. Um, but we end up now at least being in a position that it's not a big problem. Now, Why exactly is it not a big problem for us? Now, what we have is in B2B, the products tend to be more expensive. And the bill of material tends not necessarily be more expensive. If you look at our products, so I can't disclose the details, obviously, but it's chipsets, a little bit of electronics, and a little bit more plastic than other things which are more compact. This thing itself doesn't make it much more expensive. Okay. So without saying the details, what you can automatically infer from that is the margins are just much better. And if you do very simple calculations, let's assume we have a product that sells for 10,000 and it costs you 1,000 to produce. The tariff actually is only made on the bill of material. And so let's say even you have 100%, you double the price. Then we're going from 1,000 to 2,000. And so if I forward that all to the customer, it will mean I will only need to increase the price by 10%, which really doesn't affect you that much. And that's a very hardcore example. But if you're running a product that you produce at 400 and you're selling at 500, and now you're having 100, you're screwed, right? And so that's the reason, thanks to our, in short, good margins, it didn't really affect us. Like, even worst case scenario would not affect us, really. But it would definitely affect Apple or anyone else selling consumer products. And to the extent that we believe that cannot be held up for more than like 3 months, then like, there's going to be a huge amount of other problems around. So that's why I think we had a lot of fun around it. And what also was good is we had enough stock in the US. We could have lived for quite a long time until we actually would need to import and actually pay the tariffs.
Yeah, I guess I kind of understand from working on the hardware org for a couple years now. Looking at some of the bill of materials breakdown, it's like so minuscule. Some of these components are worth
Yeah.
pennies, and it makes sense for hardware manufacturers because at scale these pennies add up.
Yeah.
But if you're working on relatively small volume and charging customers primarily for the cost of services, and the AI and the support and all the software that you built around the hardware, I guess maybe that makes sense where you're not affected as much.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it really also depends on what country is good. Now, I don't want to go too political, obviously, but trade in this sense is if certain countries are very good at certain things, might somehow need to be able to leverage it. And I think Switzerland is maybe a very extreme example of that, how we grew up, really, because we don't have a lot of resources. We sort of need to share what is around. And so I think it's obviously very difficult to force everything into the US through that. Nevertheless, I see, let's say, the general belief behind it. And I still think, and I think that's actually quite sad, if technology and know-how gets away and is not around anymore, specifically in the Western hemisphere. And so I think that is a very good drive to get that. To what extent that can be played or negotiated or power played pushed through is probably the question. But I still think it will be very dangerous to lose that know-how, I think. And so I'm very much in favor for all of that. Whereas I still think, obviously, if you do large scale manufacturing at millions of devices, you're probably going to be very difficult off. If you would say you couldn't do the iPhone in the US, it would be impossible. I mean, you could, but no, I could really afford it anymore. And so it's sort of a trade-off, I think, between how low do you want prices to go and what other set of aspects are you driving, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's interesting to what you say about Shenzhen, to say, oh, there's these markets here that you can easily make prototypes. Actually, I remember there was a YouTube video that I saw a few years ago. This was back when the iPhone 7 first came out, when they didn't have a headphone jack. And then there was a guy who went around to the markets in Shenzhen, and he just was able to actually just create an iPhone just from parts bins. And he was able to actually create one with the headphone jack. So that made me always wanted to go visit Shenzhen. It seems like this kind of really awesome place. Because like, I've never been there, but I really want to go check it out. Um, so when you mentioned that, manufacturing in China is just more possible, like what, how difficult do you think it would be to manufacture something that like you create, in the United States if you even want to go that route? Like, is that even possible? Or do you think that it's kind of like a pipe dream of the administration to say like, hey, this is something that you'd be able to do just like immediately? Because in my mind, it would be incredibly difficult to just drop all the manufacturing in China and then just go spin up some sort of manufacturing plant in the United States? Because I don't know if like the know-how is there, if there's enough people who would even like if the materials are there, like the whole supply chain needs to be built up. So I'm just
Yeah.
curious, like if you have a thought, like is this even like possible that like could you even start like tomorrow, even if you really wanted to?
Yeah. It's a very good question because we obviously still look around on, let's say, for example, assembly. Get them assembled somewhere else. I think that's the first step you look at. And that obviously is very easy to do, right? Labor cost is higher, but you can assemble it. Now, testing equipment after assembly gets again a little bit more difficult, but you can also sort of scrap them together and you can do that as well. Now, that makes your device assembled in the US, not yet made in the US necessarily. And now different countries have different laws on what actually needs to happen such that the product is allowed to be claimed made in and not just assembled in, which then makes a big difference when you go to other discussions again. But from that point of view, if you actually would want to make everything in-house in the US, let's say as an example, there's certain things which are easier. Plastics, for example, plastic injection, if not maybe as much know-how around as in China, I'm clearly not even close. You can do it. Same in Switzerland. There's quite some companies, large scale, that do injection molding in-house. You pay way more for the molds, and then it gets an issue if you prototype, right? You need to modify molds, and the molds need to be very precise. Specifically, if you have a steel molds, it takes quite a lot of time, 5-6 weeks, just to adapt the mold, and it costs tens of thousands just to make a mold. And for each part, you need to have a mold. So it gets very costly if you just want to get started, so specific on startup side. But let's assume you already have everything. You can move the molds. That you can do. And there's machines around, so you can do the plastic. That's not an issue. I guess the electronics part is the hardest. So you can have assembly. You can get that done as well. That's also done in Switzerland. I guess the hardest point I would see from the capabilities, which is hard to find, is flex print. I know it's possible, but we had very difficulties to find that anywhere else than in China. And even there, you want to be fast and iterate. We have flexible PCB, and it's just literally unmatched. I guess you could probably build it out, but then again, the cost increase would be dramatic. And I think where it really comes down to is then this integration of all of these different parts, right? I need to have this, and then I need to have the experts on that, quickly integrated with that. And then I quickly move the parts from here over here. I quickly get the new camera sensors, and next day I have it in-house because it's just my neighbor who has it. I think that is the hardest part to get short term. I still think you could get it long term. But I guess that's very hard to get just instantly over. So I think that is the biggest challenge. And then the second probably is then maybe a little bit work ethics, where let's say if you have an issue in China, then everyone is not going away on the weekend. You're going to solve it. This work attitude just doesn't really exist to this extent in Europe, at least. In the US, probably also not as much. There's not as much vacation. They really have a really strong focus on the company and the vision and wanting to do that. And obviously, it comes with a lot of drawbacks and what that actually means. At least everything I saw on C is, let's say, the work environments are okay. They're definitely not as nice as on our desks. But I think there's a big difference. But you need to have a culture as well, which is ready to solve no matter what. And actually, we just had a discussion with an investor this morning who also said it's so difficult. They tried to manufacture certain very complex part here in the US. They really wanted to. They invested a lot of money to get it done here, add all the stuff, but the people just didn't have enough dedication to solve it. So they needed to still have a lot of external people then flown in to actually solve it in the end. And then at the end, they need to say, hey, we just can't do it. We need to move it out. So do I think it's possible? Yeah, definitely. Is it challenging? Yeah, definitely as well. And so I think it still needs to be kickstarted, and I think it can be a good kickstart to get specific to the things that are doable back. And so, yeah, I really hope that will be possible to as much as possible without losing the advantage of the lower price, I would say.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's interesting what you say about the culture fit because it's not something that I actually consider, but that's true. I think that the Western style of work versus, I guess, the Eastern style of work is definitely a lot different. So, for example, I've lived and worked in Japan for years, and I think that in Japan there was a high like, I think people just take their job, like, incredibly seriously here, right? So, people will work late into the nights. People will maybe not be the most efficient, but if your boss is in the office, you will be in the office, and you will stay there working hard, and I think that people here are, like, incredibly good at following process, and thus I can't speak as much for China, but at least I can say in Japan, it allows you to get just incredibly high quality, um, goods, and then also, you can also rely on the worker because I think at least in Japan, you have a lot of companies where you're able to work there almost your entire career if you want to. So, at the US or in other countries, I don't know what it is in Switzerland, a lot of people will job hop every few years, but in I think in, like, Asian countries, it's a lot much more common where people will kind of look at these types of jobs as a career, where you will go, join the company at 22 as soon as you graduate from college, and then you will stay there until you're 65 and retire, and then maybe you will start working, a little bit later, but you're there and you are dedicated to the company. So I think that kind of mindset just doesn't exist in the West, and it's I don't know. I don't know if that necessarily translates to better products, but I do think that it is, like, a distinct difference, and that probably maybe does translate, to better products. So, yeah, it's interesting how you say that. Yeah, it
This
makes
is you're right, right? This is only what I see.
yeah.
There's a lot of great advantages to both sides, right? I think, and that is very important to say. All the credible people we know from China, all around Asia, Europe, and the US. It's the greatest thing usually happen if the greatest part of everything sort of come together and build something great together.
Yeah, for sure, and I think that you can't have one without the other, right? I think that on the one hand, it's good to be, kind of dedicated to a problem, but then on the other hand, it's good to have kind of like the free thinker who maybe job hops every now and then because maybe they'll be more willing to speak their mind and they'd be more okay
Or
problem
more
solving.
insight from different thing. It might help a
Yeah.
lot with innovating because I think that's another point where I think the US is just so many steps ahead. Also, specifically if I compare with Switzerland now, just to think outside of the box and like really try to do more and really think further ahead than just a little bit. I think specifically in Switzerland, I think that's a little bit hard for us sometimes to see that people, you almost need to think small. You have a very small market. You only have 8 million people. Then we speak 4 different languages in the small area. It's like, it's not really the place to scale. So you, but you have other things that evolve. And I think that really flourish there. Maybe not huge visions, very build automotive companies or go to the moon yet, I think. But it's different, I think, yeah.
On that note, maybe since we were talking about work culture and we talked about your background, kind of taking a break from your master's and starting a company, tinkering on projects on the side, eventually, building something that lasts out of that. Do you have any advice for our listeners who may be still in college or who may be like itching to start something else? How would they get their hands on some of these hardware products, tinker with and build applications in VR, AR,
Sure.
work with hardware too, in addition to software? Any tips, guidance, especially like today, because we have a lot of tools that make it a lot easier to
Mm.
get up and running, and maybe like if you could suggest things that they could do, maybe visit China, go to Shenzhen,
Definitely.
pick up a couple of pieces and like start soldering them together.
Yeah, definitely. So what I would say very much in the beginning first is, in general, if you start any kind of endeavor, and that's maybe more personal advice on that specifically, is look for a friend who joins you on the journey. Because so I did that together with Sebastian, and even has the idea slightly before me even. This is very important. You can't do it alone if you want to go all the way. I think we had always us together, and it's very nice to have someone, a sparring partner, to really exchange ideas and figure out how crazy you are, to actually solve something that goes with you through all the good times and all the bad times, in all sense, and get a cool team and fun team around that it doesn't feel like work because you're working a lot. and you're doing a lot of hours. And if you feel like working, it's really not fun in the end. Whereas if you love what you're doing, it really doesn't feel like work. I guess that's more a very general approach. But coming specifically on the hardware side, I think I'm obviously an engineer. I have an engineering background, and that obviously helps. If you have some ideas, I guess it's very difficult to join the hardware game if you have no idea what a pull-up resistor is, or just don't really know all of these aspects. But assuming you have an engineering background to some extent, I think obviously Arduino is sort of the first platform that people would recommend. But it's probably more high school, say, rather than you obviously jump on Raspberry Pi. You can do a lot of these things. What helped us a lot is really think of a problem and then trying to solve it, sort of no matter what. And it's very important that you usually also don't need to go down a specific road of, do I want to choose Arduino? Do I want to choose Raspberry Pi? What do I want to do? Because there's a lot of platform that can solve the issue. But if you could just get started on something, get to know what it works, the ins and outs, and what you can control with, you can get a long, long way. But then, as you said, I think going to China would definitely help. And so, for example, Sebastian, the other co-founder, our CEO, he was actually studying in China. I think that helped a lot. Specifically in the beginning, he had that whole drive of, oh my gosh, they are crazy over there, crazy fast. They're saying Shenzhen speed. They're so much faster. We need to take this mindset and get things done. And specifically, if you're a little bit in China, if you have the opportunity to be there, it's great to see what you can actually do and how fast you can do things, where it seems sometimes it takes a very long time. And why that actually is, again, is because you have everything together and everyone knows where is what. And I think, Mark, what you mentioned is a very good example, adding a audio jack to an iPhone. I think I also saw videos where they did USB-C to previous iPhone. Because they didn't have, they only had Lightning before, obviously. And these kind of things you can get done with brilliant minds all together that understand the technology. And I think specifically now that you can learn so fast, specifically with all the LLMs coming up, a new subject can help you solving it. It has never been that great. And obviously it's easier in software, but it's also a complete new area, I think, also for hardware to learn things, get things done. Because even if you're doing hardware, you're touching software all the time, right? Because your hardware isn't going to do anything by just soldering it together, except if you're doing a light switch. And so I think if you get onto a platform and you really get good at it, to the extent that you can do something with it, you really quickly start to understand what else you can do with it, and the ball just keeps rolling until you're running on dev kits of complete other chipsets and running very more complex things down the road. But obviously also for the ones who don't study, I would still say studying helps a lot, but might not be a requirement anymore. Again, I don't want to open that kind of worms, but you can learn a lot without going to study as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like the advice to start with potentially an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi. I think, I've played around with that stuff in college and it was pretty useful, but I agree with you. I think that just going and trying to solve a problem, it really helps you just learn a lot, because I think that sometimes the problem with following tutorials or following a kind of the stated path right through school is you're oftentimes just doing the easy things, right? But then when you are up late at night just trying to solve one particular bug or your particular use case that nobody else has solved before, you can't always just look at a textbook to see how to do that, right? Like, you're not going to necessarily look at a tutorial to say, like, hey, like, how do I solve this brand new problem that nobody's ever solved before? You just have to go and then figure it out yourself and put different things together, and then you're going to become like an expert in that case. And I think that, at least speaking from my own experience, when I've tried to solve things that like I couldn't just easily Google, like I felt like my skill level just rapidly increased as opposed to just following tutorial. Because following tutorial is nice, but you don't like truly deeply understand why something is done the way it is until like you're actually the one um solving it. So yeah, I think that's like super awesome advice. So now one thing I'm curious, is it possible if people wanted to kind of hack on your headsets if they could do that, is there some sort of developer kit, or is this more reserved for the people, like the businesses, who are using your headsets directly?
Very good question. So right, actually, what we have on our devices, I mean, given that they run Android, a lot of things you can do out of the box. So we have also properly documented SDK. I'd say it's probably never documented well enough, specifically if things are evolving, but you might also know that. Um, but you can do a lot of things just with a normal device. If you get one at hand, now obviously they're sold to B2B. You can still get them secondhand, our devices. You can start put your own Android application on these devices and start to see, hey, it's great what I can start doing, right? Okay, sometimes you need to have system level permissions. It's a little bit more difficult. You can always reach out happily to us. We'll provide you certain details that you need to get going. What we also have, and we do that with universities from time to time, if we have older generations, we leave some amounts of devices back that we can then start using again for these kind of tinkering things. So we're doing that together with ETH, that's another school in Zurich, a very famous one, where we hand a few hundred devices to them and they can give it out to their scholars really to solve problems on a device. They can have it, they can play around it. And so if someone is listening in, I think you can always try to reach out to us. There's always devices that come back from previous users that are maybe not refurbished. They still work. They might have some scratches, but they can be used again. You can start playing and build on top of them because it's a great thing, right? You have displays, you have cameras there. The audio is very well optimized for wearing a device. It has a lot of beamforming integrated. So you can solve a lot of issues with it, whereas on the phone, you're a bit more limited. And so, yeah, for that, it is great. It is a little bit pricey, like currently at least, since they're more focused onto the B2B side. It's a little bit of an issue currently. You spend quite a lot of it. If you get one secondhand, it's a lot of fun. And I think the more and more we go now with our software capabilities onto other hardware devices, I guess it's not going to take that long until you're going to get one which is much cheaper to get a lot done on it.
I guess on that note, do you have any call to action for our audience? Anything you'd like to announce, especially because you are opening up a new office here near Santa Cruz? Any open roles for jobs, either here or remotely in other countries?
Yeah. So, yeah, thanks so much again for the opportunity for that. I think what we would always love, and I think that is great, is that if everyone gets together and solves issue, and I think you guys do exactly that, which is also why I'm here, right? Driving the whole communities forward to get people together to solve issues and solve problems together and get things done. And so I think that's the most important part, and that's also why we're coming here. As said before, right? Our headquarters is currently in all the way north. It's cold. It's great weather here. People actually love to get together, solve problems together. There's some of the probably the greatest people on earth that are all around here, and we love to take advantage of that. And so if there's something that we also can help you with, or anyone else who's listening, please reach out. We'd love to find time to actually solve things. But we obviously also have things we are looking for, and I think what we see is we need a lot of app developer, way more than we thought, to get things done. If you understand AOSP, that's also great. It's very hard to find people. But we sort of end up always finding the people. And I think in the end, what is also very important is connections and ideas. And I think that is sometimes probably almost more valuable. I think nowadays that I would believe the time it takes for an idea to actually hit a end product is probably going to be shorter. It needs less and less developers and less time and less money and less effort. I think the ideas itself become almost more valuable to the extent that most believe ideally one would patent ideas, probably obviously won't be possible. But I think specifically at that point is probably almost going to be the most important one of what is a good idea, what is a bad idea. And that might even be that I have an idea that then majority of the people would say, oh my gosh, that's a very bad idea. So it's very valuable to stop before one starts doing something. And I think we specifically look for that. If people see and say, oh my gosh, this is crazy, don't do that. And specifically, if I look at our current, specifically hardware portfolio, I think there's a lot of things that we can do better, um, that maybe also weren't possible back in the days. But also thanks to feedback, are now getting better because we just literally can't see everything. And I think that's our greatest wish, that people reach out and form connection and really help solving problems that are sometimes visible and sometimes sadly not visible.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think that's pretty much all we had, and I don't want to take your time. I know it's very late there. So yeah, I appreciate the time. And yeah, for all those things, we'll try to put the link in the description. So if people want to reach out to you, they can. But yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is an amazing conversation. Hope you got something out of it. Hope you got something out of your visit here in Silicon
Definitely. And then, as I said already, Mark, right, as soon as we have our office here, we're definitely going to invite you for some surfing at the beach. And then we're going to go dancing once.
That sounds lovely. Yeah, I just found out Timon does salsa too. This is, Q engineer. What a coincidence! I do Latin dance, which is very random, but speaks to like the diversity and creativity in Silicon Valley too, and the tech community at large. But again, it was a pleasure having you. This is an amazing
Thanks so much.
conversation, and yeah, for our listeners, see you next time.